The scent was the first violation. It clung to the fine fibers of his sleep tunic, a ghost of warmth against the chilled, recycled air of the penthouse. It was not Kalen's scent. Kalen's was a precise, cold fragrance, engineered to smell of authority and winter mint, a scent that commanded order and left no room for interpretation. This other scent was chaos. It was amber and scorched earth and something wild that had no place within these hermetically sealed walls, 100 stories above the smog-choked city. Elias drew a slow, deliberate breath, letting the foreign molecules settle in his lungs, a quiet act of rebellion he could not yet name. He was Unit 734, designated Elias, Prime Omega of the Ethel Guard Consortium, bonded to Director Kalen Vance. His life was a symphony of meticulously calibrated moments. The nutrient paste he consumed at 007 No, the somatic conditioning at 11s, the silent companionship he provided Kalen at 22. Every variable was controlled, every outcome predicted, except for this, the scent. It had been 3 days since the incident at the Nexus Gala. A brush of bodies in the thronging crowd, a hand steadying his arm, a low murmur too deep to be anything but an alpha's. He had recoiled, of course, as his conditioning demanded. But in that fleeting contact, the alpha had left a part of himself behind. A deliberate marking, so subtle it was almost an act of psychic warfare rather than a physical claim. It was an impossible, suicidal act of defiance in a world where scent was signature, bond, and law. And it was fading. The thought sent a strange, sharp pang of something like loss through him. He pressed the collar of his tunic to his nose, inhaling the last vestiges of that illicit warmth. It was a dangerous comfort, a poison he was foolishly savoring. He was an asset. He was not a person. He was a testament to Kalen's status, a living work of art whose only purpose was to be beautiful, placid, and owned. Kalen did not tolerate imperfections. A foreign scent was not an imperfection. It was an insurrection. The door to the master suite slid open with a frictionless hiss. Kalen stood silhouetted against the cool, blue light of the corridor, his frame sharp and tailored even in his evening wear. He moved with an unnerving economy of motion, each step silent on the polished obsidian floor. Elias. His voice was like the scent he wore, crisp, clean, devoid of unnecessary warmth. Elias rose from the edge of the bed, his movements fluid, practiced, a perfect arc of submission. He kept his eyes lowered, his hands clasped loosely before him. Director. Your levels are fluctuating, Kalen stated, not as a question, but as an accusation. He moved closer, the proximity sensors in the room dimming the lights to a soft, intimate glow. It was a programmed intimacy, as hollow as the rest of this life. Your biometrics registered a spike in cortisol 3 days ago, another this morning. Explain. Elias's heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against his ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage of bone. He could feel the last traces of the other alpha's scent being consumed by the sheer, sterile power of Kalen's presence. He had to say something. The conditioning provided the words, the placid tone. A minor somatic irregularity. The med unit has already administered a stabilizer. It was a lie, but a plausible one. His body was a machine, and machines sometimes required recalibration. Kalen's fingers, cold and firm, tilted his chin upward. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, searched Elias's face for the hairline fractures of deceit. Show me your neck. A command, not a request. Elias swallowed, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. He turned his head, exposing the pale, smooth skin where Kalen's bite mark should have been. It was there, of course, a delicate silver tracery of healed tissue, the symbol of their bond. But Kalen was not looking at the mark. He was inhaling, his nostrils flaring almost imperceptibly. A moment stretched into an eternity. The air grew thin, heavy with unspoken threat. Then Kalen's thumb brushed against Elias's scent gland, just below his ear. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through Elias. It was a gesture of ownership, of inspection. Kalen's expression did not change, but a coldness emanated from him that was more terrifying than any shout. "There is an anomaly," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow sharper than steel. "A foreign biological marker. Faint, but present. He was not an asset. He was not an experiment. He was afraid." The conditioning fought against the primal fear, trying to smooth it into manageable compliance. But the terror was a living thing, clawing its way up his throat. Kalen released him, stepping back. The programmed intimacy of the lighting vanished, replaced by a stark, clinical white. The room became an interrogation chamber. Who was it? Elias remained silent, his mind a maelstrom of panic. To admit it would be a death sentence. To deny it further was impossible. Kalen already knew. He was simply dissecting the lie, enjoying the process. At the gala, Kalen continued, his voice calm, conversational, which was infinitely more frightening. The disruption near the west veranda. I reviewed the security logs. An alpha from a rival syndicate, Lysander Kane. He has been a thorn in the consortium's side for months. Aggressive expansion, unorthodox methods. It seems his unorthodoxy extends to personal affairs. Kalen circled him slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. "Did you invite this, Elias? Did your somatic irregularity signal some kind of distress? Some pathetic, pre-packaged invitation for a rogue to intervene?" "No, Director," Elias breathed, the words tasting like ash. "I would never." "You would not," Kalen agreed, his tone flat. "Because you are incapable of it. You are designed for loyalty, for obedience, which means this was not an act of seduction. It was an act of vandalism. He defaced my property." The clinical detachment in his words was a physical blow. Property, not a person, not even a pet, an object. Kalen stopped in front of him, his face a mask of placid control. "This requires correction, a deep system purge. We will return to the Ethelgard Tower tomorrow. The technicians will recalibrate you. They will erase this anomaly, and they will reinforce your loyalty protocols." He reached out, his hand settling on the back of Elias's neck, fingers pressing into the sensitive nerves there. It was not a caress. It was a warning, a leash being tightened. "You will be cleansed, Elias, and you will be made perfect again. You will remember who you belong to." The amber and scorched earth scent was gone now, completely obliterated by the sterile mint of Kalen's dominance. But in the deepest part of his mind, Elias clung to the memory of it, a fading ember in the encroaching cold. It was the only thing that felt real, the only thing that felt his own. The punishment was not pain. Pain was a crude instrument, imprecise and inefficient. Kalen's methods were surgical. The punishment was silence. It was the removal of stimuli, the systematic starvation of the senses, until Elias's world shrank to the dimensions of the correction chamber. The room was a perfect sphere of seamless, milky white polymer. There were no corners, no edges, no textures. The light was uniform, emanating from the walls themselves, a sourceless shadowless glare that erased all depth. The air was filtered to an absolute purity, carrying no scent but the faint, sterile tang of ozone. He floated in a saline suspension, the water kept at the exact temperature of his body, blurring the boundary between his skin and the world around him. He was a mind adrift in a sea of nothing. They had taken his clothes, his identity, everything, but the thoughts Kalen sought to purge. For the first cycle, there was only the rhythmic, metronomic hum of the environmental controls, a sound designed to lull the conscious mind into a state of passive receptivity. He was supposed to meditate on his function, on his bond to Kalen, on the perfection of the system that had created him. Instead, his mind fixated on the ghost of a scent, amber, scorched earth. He tried to reconstruct it from memory, a desperate act of preservation. He remembered the heat of the alpha's hand on his arm, the low vibration of his voice. He had not seen the man's face clearly, only an impression of dark hair, eyes that held a startling intensity, and a jawline that spoke of defiance. Lysander Kane, a rival, a vandal. Why? What could a man like that possibly gain from such a reckless, pointless gesture? It was a declaration of war against Kalen, using Elias as the battlefield. He felt a surge of cold fury, a feeling so alien it was almost frightening. He was not angry for Kalen's sake. He was angry for his own. He was the canvas on which they painted their ambitions, their rivalries. A voice, disembodied and smooth, echoed through the chamber. It was the voice of the Ethel Guard AI, the same one that had guided his development from incubation. Unit 734. Begin Loyalty Affirmation Protocol. Recite your primary directive. Elias closed his eyes, the featureless white burning against his lids. The words were etched into his neural pathways, as much a part of him as his own DNA. My purpose is to serve the vision of the Ethel Guard Consortium. My function is to reflect the strength and stability of my bonded alpha. My existence is contingent upon my flawless performance. The voice paused, analyzing his vocal patterns for any trace of deviation. There is a conflict in your limbic system. A foreign emotional marker is disrupting baseline harmony. Identify the source. He did not want to speak the name. He did not want to give them the satisfaction. But the conditioning was a physical force, tightening in his chest, compelling him. Lysander Kane, he whispered, the sound swallowed by the sterile environment. The marker is characterized by notes of defiance, unsanctioned warmth, and protection. The last word slipped out, a betrayal. It was not what the AI wanted to hear. It was not what he was supposed to feel. But it was the truth. In that brief, chaotic moment at the gala, beneath the aggression of the marking, he had felt a flicker of something else. A shield. Correction. The AI's voice was flat, unemotional. The marker is an act of aggression, a contamination. It is to be purged. Visualize the bond to your designated alpha, Director Kalen Vance. Reinforce the pathways. Feel the purity of its structure, the perfection of its design. A low-frequency wave pulsed through the water, vibrating deep within his bones. It was a resonance key, designed to stimulate the pleasure centers of his brain, associated with Kalen's pheromones. He was supposed to feel a sense of peace, of rightness. He was supposed to feel Kalen's cold, mint-scented presence wrap around him like a comforting shroud. But the memory of the other scent fought back. It was a tenacious, living thing. The warmth of it, the raw, untamed earthiness of it, was a stark contrast to the sterile pleasure the machine was trying to induce. It felt real, Kalen's bond felt like a beautifully constructed cage. This other feeling, it felt like a key. Resistance detected, the AI stated. Increasing frequency, purge protocol initiated. The hum intensified. The water around him began to prickle with a mild electrical current. It was not painful, but it was invasive. It felt like tiny needles trying to stitch his thoughts back into their proper, ordered pattern. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He focused on the memory. The press of a thumb against his pulse point, the rumble of a voice, the scent of a storm gathering on a dry plain. It was an anchor in the white nothingness. He was not just Unit 734. He was not just an asset. Before Ethelgard, before Kalen, what was he? The question was a heresy. He had no before. He was created, not born. He was engineered for a purpose. But the question remained, a crack in the perfect facade of his conditioning. Had there been a time when his world was not white walls and regulated air? Had there been a sun, dirt, a scent that was not manufactured? The electrical current sharpened. The AI's voice became more insistent, layering commands over one another, a hypnotic drone meant to overwhelm his defenses. Erase the anomaly. Embrace the bond. Purity is strength. Obedience is purpose. You belong to Director Vance. You are an extension of his will. The foreign marker is a cancer. Excising it is necessary for your survival. He felt his resistance begin to fray. The conditioning was so deep, so absolute. It was the foundation of his being. To fight it was to fight himself. The memory of Lysander Kane began to blur, the scent fading into a generic chemical smell. The warmth dissipated, replaced by the cool, precise pleasure signal of Kalen's bond. He was losing. A single, hot tear escaped the corner of his eye, dissolving instantly into the saline suspension, its saltiness indistinguishable from the water that held him. He was being erased, and in that moment of despair, a new memory surfaced, unbidden. Not a scent, not a touch, but a sound. A child's laugh, his own. It was impossible. He had never been a child. He had been a specimen, a project. But the sound was there, clear as a bell in the roaring silence of his mind. And with it, a flash of an image. Two small hands, one his, one belonging to another boy, clasped together as they ran through a field of what looked like dry, yellow grass, under a sky that was a brilliant, impossible blue. The boy beside him had dark, unruly hair and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. The AI's voice faltered for a microsecond. Unidentified memory fragment detected. Source unknown. Classifying as a system error. Intensifying purge. But it was too late. The image was seared into his mind. The feeling of the other boy's hand in his. The warmth of the sun on his skin. The smell of dust and dry grass. It was real. He knew it was real. The boy's name was on the tip of his tongue. Sander. The purge intensified, the electrical field becoming a painful, convulsive force. But Elias clung to the memory, to the name. It was more than an anchor now. It was a weapon. He was not a blank slate. Someone had tried to wipe him clean, but they had missed a spot. A tiny, resilient fragment of a life he was never supposed to remember. Lysander Kane. Sander. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was not a random act of vandalism. It was a message from a past he didn't know he had. And in the heart of the sterile white sphere, surrounded by the machinery of his own subjugation, Unit 734 made a choice. He would not be cleansed. He would remember. Lysander Kane stood before the panoramic window of his office, the city sprawling below like a circuit board of captured lightning. The Aethelgard Tower, Kaelin's monument to sterile ambition, pierced the perpetual twilight, its peak wreathed in clouds of toxic smog. From this distance, it was almost beautiful, a gleaming needle of corporate power. He knew better. He knew the rot at its core. He raised a glass of amber liquid to his lips, the smoky peat of the Scotch, a familiar comfort. It was a scent of the old world, of earth and fire, a stark contrast to the synthesized fragrances favored by the city's elite. It was a scent he hoped that Elias would remember. His hand still tingled with the ghost of their contact. The smooth, cool skin of Elias's arm, the frantic, bird-like pulse fluttering beneath his thumb. He had held on for only a second, long enough to press his scent into the delicate skin of the Omega's wrist, a desperate, silent scream across a crowded room. A foolish, reckless act. His second-in-command, a pragmatic woman named Anya, had called it suicidal. She was not wrong, but she did not understand. She had not grown up in the white rooms of Aethelgard's Omega refinement program. She had not seen them take a vibrant, laughing child and systematically dismantle him, piece by piece, until all that remained was a beautiful, hollow shell. He closed his eyes, and the memory was there, sharp and painful as ever. He was Sander, a scrawny, defiant alpha pup, deemed too volatile for the program's later stages. Elias was El, a gentle, curious Omega boy, with eyes the color of a dawn sky and a scent like rain on warm stone. They were the program's greatest successes and its most profound failures. El was too sensitive, too empathetic. He felt the pain of the other children, the sterile loneliness of their existence. Sander was too protective, too unwilling to bend. They had found solace in each other, two anomalies in a system that demanded uniformity. They had promised each other they would see the sun, not the filtered UV-scrubbed light of the facility's solarium, but the real thing. They had made a plan, a childish, impossible plan to escape, but the system was thorough. They were separated. Sander was relegated to a lesser program, eventually sold off to a minor corporate house he would later dismantle from the inside. El, with his perfect genetics and pliable nature, was chosen for the prime Omega project. They had polished him, conditioned him, and bonded him to the consortium's rising star, Kaelin Vance. They had erased his memories, smoothed over his personality, and buried the boy named El beneath layers of protocol and programming. Lysander had spent years clawing his way up, building his own empire from the ground up, all with a single, obsessive goal: to find El. When he finally located him, saw him at Kaelin's side at some corporate function, a perfect, placid doll, something inside him had broken. The boy he knew was gone, and in his place was this creation, a masterpiece of Aethelgard's cruelty. He had tried conventional methods first, overtures to buy Elias's contract, corporate sabotage to weaken Kaelin's position. All had failed. Kaelin saw Elias not as a person, but as the ultimate status symbol, a living embodiment of his power. He would never let him go. So Lysander had resorted to the unorthodox. Scent was memory. It was the most primal, most deeply ingrained sense, capable of bypassing conscious thought and speaking directly to the soul. Kaelin's bond was a firewall, a sophisticated piece of biochemical programming. But it wasn't perfect. Lysander gambled that his own scent, a scent from Elias's buried past, could act as a virus, a key to unlock the prison of his conditioning. The first marking, a brush in a corridor, had been a test. The second, at the gala, was a statement. He was coming for what was his, not his property, his friend, his something more. He refused to name the feeling. It was a vulnerability he could not afford. Anya's voice came through his private comm, crisp and efficient. Intel is in. Kalen took him to the tower. He's in a correction chamber on sub-level 12. Lysander's hand tightened around his glass, the crystal groaning in protest. A correction chamber. He knew what that meant. Sensory deprivation, neural reprogramming, psychological torture, refined to a bloodless clinical science. They were trying to purge him, to erase the memory he had so desperately tried to awaken. "For how long?" he asked, his voice tight. "Standard protocol is 72 hours for a minor infraction. They'll see this as a major security breach. They could keep him in there indefinitely. Kalen can't risk a faulty asset being seen in public." A cold dread, colder than the city night, settled in his gut. He had thought he was waking Elias up. What if he had just signed his death warrant? What if all he had done was give Kalen a reason to destroy the last vestiges of the boy he remembered and replace them with something even more compliant, even more broken? He stared at the Ethelgard Tower, no longer seeing a beautiful structure, but a tomb. A sterile, white tomb, where the boy he loved was being systematically erased. He had been playing a long game, a game of corporate chess. But Kalen had just taken his queen. Also, he thought, no, he would not let fear paralyze him. He had started this. He would finish it. The game had to change. No more subtle provocations. No more scent marking from the shadows. This would be an extraction, a heist. He would tear Kalen's perfect world apart to get Elias back. "Anya," he said, his voice now calm, imbued with a chilling sense of purpose. "Get me the schematics for sub-level 12 of the Ethelgard Tower. I want to know everything. Power grids, ventilation systems, security patrols, programming protocols for the correction chambers, everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Lysander, that's a fortress. A direct assault is suicide." "I'm not planning an assault," he replied, turning from the window, his reflection a fleeting ghost in the dark glass. "I'm planning a rescue, and I'll need a key, not to a door, to a memory." He looked at his desk, at a small, lead-lined box. Inside was the only thing he had managed to keep from their time together. A small, smooth stone, grey, with a single white stripe, that they had found in the gravel of the facility's recreation yard. A secret treasure. A promise. He would get it to Elias. He had to. It was time to stop whispering to the ghost of the boy he remembered. It was time to give the man he had become a reason to fight his way out. He would burn Kalen's world to the ground if he had to. He would become the monster they always said he was. All to hear that gentle, curious boy say his name one more time. L. The gala was a masterpiece of controlled excess. Held in the crystalline atrium of the Zenith Observatory, it offered a panoramic view of the glittering, toxic jewel of the city below. Orchestral music, algorithmically composed to induce a state of pleasant consumerism, drifted through the air, mingling with the sense of hydroponic night-blooming jasmine and expensive, synthesized pheromones. Elias stood at Kalen's side, a portrait of serene perfection. His suit was woven from spider silk and optical fibers, shimmering with a soft, internal light that shifted from silver to pale blue with his every breath. His face was a placid mask, his posture exuding a quiet grace that drew admiring glances from all corners of the room. He was the perfect accessory. Inside, He was a tempest. The session in the correction chamber had failed. It had done the opposite of what Kalen intended. It had not purged him. It had galvanized him. The memory of Sander, of their shared stolen childhood, was now a shield against the conditioning. The AI's attempts to rewrite his mind had only served to etch the memory deeper. He had feigned compliance, of course. He had emerged from the white sphere seemingly cleansed, his biometrics stable, his responses perfectly calibrated. He had recited his primary directive with flawless conviction. Kalen had been pleased. He had mistaken the stillness of a coiled spring for the placidity of a broken spirit. It was a fatal miscalculation. Now, surrounded by the predatory elite of the corporate world, Elias was more alert than he had ever been. He scanned the crowd not as a passive observer, but as a hunter. He was searching for a scent, amber and scorched earth. He was searching for Lysander. "You are quiet tonight," Kalen murmured, his fingers resting lightly on the small of Elias's back, a gesture that looked affectionate to outsiders, but was, to Elias, the cold pressure of a keeper's hand. "The recalibration appears to have been a success. Your focus is improved." "I exist to serve, Director," Elias replied, the words smooth and automatic, a perfect echo of his programming. But his eyes continued to move, cataloguing faces, assessing threats and opportunities. He found him near the observatory's main telescope, a stark, powerful figure in a suit of charcoal grey that seemed to absorb the light around him, Lysander Kane. He was talking to a rival executive, but his gaze was fixed, unwavering, on Elias. There was no mistaking the raw intensity in those eyes. It was the same look the boy named Sander used to have when he was about to do something reckless. A thrill, equal parts terror and exhilaration, shot through Elias. This was it. Something was going to happen tonight. He could feel it in the air, a tension that crackled beneath the polite hum of conversation. He needed to get closer. He needed a reason. "Director," he said softly, his voice a perfect pitch of demure request. "The atmospheric pressure is causing a slight discomfort. May I get some water?" It was a calculated risk, a sign of imperfection, but it was a believable one, a minor flaw in an otherwise perfect machine. Kalen's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second. "The med unit should have adjusted your tolerances. Very well. Do not linger." He gave a curt nod, releasing him. Elias moved through the crowd with practiced ease, a phantom of grace and light. Every step was measured, every glance controlled. But his heart was pounding a frantic, wild rhythm. He was off the leash, if only for a moment. He reached the refreshment station, his fingers trembling slightly as he picked up a crystal glass of chilled water. He could feel Lysander's presence behind him, a palpable wave of heat and that intoxicating, dangerous scent. He did not turn. He waited. "Unit 734. The voice was low, a deep rumble that vibrated right through him. It was the voice from the gala, the voice from his fragmented memories. He turned slowly, his expression carefully neutral. Lysander stood a few feet away, his face impassive, but his eyes were burning. He looked older than the boy in his memories, harder. The lines of defiance on his jaw were etched deeper, but the soul behind the eyes, that was Sander. "You are mistaken," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. "That is my designation, but not my name." It was the first truly defiant thing he had said to an alpha other than Kalen in his entire adult life. A flicker of something, surprise, admiration, crossed Lysander's face. "My apologies, Elias." He said the name as if it were a precious thing, a secret. He took a step closer, and the scent of him was overwhelming, a tidal wave of scorched earth and something deeply, primally protective. It cut through the sterile perfumes of the gala, a beacon of raw life. "They hurt you," Lysander stated, his gaze dropping to the faint, almost invisible marks on Elias's neck from the correction chamber's neural interface. "They tried," Elias corrected him, his voice barely a whisper. He took a sip of water, the cold liquid a shock to his system. "They failed." Lysander's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. A ghost of the smile from his memory touched the corners of his mouth. "I knew they would. You were always stronger than they thought." He reached into his pocket, his movements swift and economical. Before Elias could react, Lysander's hand closed over his, the one holding the glass. It was not a gentle touch. It was firm, urgent. He pressed a small, cool object into Elias's palm, his fingers closing Elias's own around it. "Remember the sun, El," he murmured, his voice so low it was almost lost in the music. And then he was gone, melting back into the crowd as if he were never there. Elias stood frozen, the cold glass in one hand, the secret object in the other. His heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of his chest. He could feel the heat of Lysander's skin lingering on his, and beneath it a fresh, potent wave of his scent, deliberately imparted. A new marking, stronger this time, a claim, a promise. He glanced down at his clenched fist. Slowly, carefully, he opened his fingers. Lying in his palm was a small, smooth stone, grey, with a single, perfect white stripe. The world tilted on its axis. The memory, once a fragment, exploded into full, vibrant life, running through a field of yellow grass, the impossible blue sky, the warmth of the sun, and Sander, his Sander, pressing an identical stone into his hand. "A promise," the memory of the boy whispered, "that we'll see the real sun together." Elias's carefully constructed composure shattered. A single, silent tear traced a path down his cheek. It was real, all of it. He was not a machine. He had a past. He had a promise to keep. He looked up, his eyes finding Kalen across the room, his keeper, his jailer. Kalen was watching him, his expression one of cold, calculating suspicion. He had seen the exchange. He knew. The game was over. The rebellion had begun. Elias closed his hand around the stone, its solid reality a weapon against the sterile perfection of his life. He was not Unit 734. He was not Kalen's asset. He was El, and he was going to see the sun. The journey back to the penthouse was a study in absolute silence. Kalen did not speak. He did not rage. He simply sat opposite Elias in the maglev vehicle, his hands steepled before him, his gaze a physical weight that sought to crush the newfound defiance blooming in Elias's chest. The air in the car was thick with Kalen's displeasure, a palpable, freezing fog of winter mint and fury. Elias held the promise stone hidden in his palm, its smooth, solid weight a secret anchor. He focused on the memory it had unlocked, on the warmth of a forgotten sun, and the loyalty of a boy he now knew as a man. It was a fragile shield against the storm he knew was coming. The moment the penthouse doors hissed shut behind them, the storm broke. But it was not a storm of sound. It was a storm of control. "Give it to me," Kalen said, his voice dangerously soft. He did not need to specify what it was. Elias met his gaze for the first time that evening, a small but significant act of insurrection. He saw no anger in Kalen's eyes, only a chilling, possessive obsession, the look of a collector whose most prized acquisition had been tarnished. Slowly, defiantly, Elias opened his hand, revealing the small, striped stone. Kalen's lips thinned into a bloodless line. He did not take the stone. He looked at it with a kind of intellectual contempt, as if it were a primitive artifact, a relic of an unsanitized world. "A rock," he said, the word dripping with disdain. "He risks a corporate war, defies every social protocol, and marks you in public, all to give you a rock. How sentimental, how utterly inefficient." He finally looked at Elias, and the full force of his cold fury was unleashed. "Did you think I was unaware of your origins, Unit 734? Did you believe your file was incomplete?" He began to pace, his movements precise and predatory. "I have read every line of your developmental history. Project Chimera, an attempt to breed Omegas with enhanced empathy and resilience. You and the alpha pup, Lysander Kane, were the two most promising subjects. You were paired for synergistic development, a foolish, sentimental experiment that was rightly terminated." The words hit Elias like physical blows. Synergistic development, paired. It wasn't just a childhood friendship. It was by design, a design that had been ripped away from them. "They noted your attachment," Kalen continued, a cruel amusement touching his voice. "It was deemed a flaw, a vulnerability, so they corrected it. They wiped your memory, excised the weakness, and rebuilt you into something perfect, something useful, something of mine." He stopped in front of Elias, his presence suffocating. "Lysander Kane is not your savior. He is your original sin. He represents the flawed, emotional creature you were before Ethelgard made you a masterpiece. He is trying to drag you back into the mud." He reached out and with a flick of his fingers sent the stone skittering across the obsidian floor. "And you are letting him." The correction chamber was clearly insufficient. "Your programming has been corrupted at a fundamental level." Elias's gaze followed the stone until it came to rest in the shadow of a sterile chrome sculpture. He felt a surge of protective anger so fierce it almost choked him. That stone was more real, more valuable than anything in this gilded cage. "My name is Elias," he said, his voice shaking but clear. Kalen laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "You have a designation. I allow you a name. Do not confuse privilege with right. You are what I say you are, and right now you are a malfunctioning asset, one that requires a more permanent solution." He turned and walked to his desk, activating a holographic interface. He keyed in a sequence of commands. "I am scheduling you for a full neural pathway reconstruction at the tower. It's a more invasive procedure. They will not simply purge the new memories. They will sever the original neural connections that allowed them to form. They will cut the boy named L out of you for good. There will be nothing left for Lysander to call to. You will be pure. You will be mine. Utterly." The finality in his voice was absolute. This was not a threat. It was a diagnosis, and he was prescribing the cure. Elias felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with fear of pain and everything to do with the fear of annihilation. He would cease to be. The memories, the warmth, the promise of the sun, all of it would be gone, and he would be nothing more than the beautiful, empty shell Kalen wanted. He looked from Kalen's back to the stone in the shadows. He thought of Lysander's face, the desperate urgency in his eyes. "Remember the sun, El. It was not just a memory. It was a command, a plea. Fight. He took a slow, deliberate breath, calming the tremor in his hands. The conditioning was still there, 1,000 tiny threads pulling him toward submission, toward acceptance of his fate. But the memory of Sander's hand in his was stronger. He had to make a choice, not between two alphas, but between existence and oblivion, between the sterile perfection of the cage and the terrifying, unknown freedom of the sun. No, he said. The word was quiet, but it echoed in the vast, silent room with the force of a sonic boom. Kalen froze, his hand hovering over the interface. He turned slowly, an expression of genuine disbelief on his face. "What did you say?" "No," Elias repeated, his voice stronger now. He straightened to his full height, the years of practiced submission falling away like a shed skin. "You will not take me back there. You will not cut him out of me. He is a part of me." Kalen's disbelief hardened into a look of cold, analytical fury. "Your defiance is a symptom of the corruption. It is meaningless. The guards will be here in 5 minutes. You have no choice." "There is always a choice," Elias said, and as he spoke, he began to move. He walked calmly, deliberately, to the far side of the room, to the panoramic window that overlooked the city. He retrieved the small grey stone from the floor, its familiar weight a comfort in his palm. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling armor glass, the city lights a dizzying tapestry below. He was 100 stories up. There was no escape, but it was not escape he was thinking of. It was a signal. He turned to face Kalen, holding the stone up for him to see. "This is more than a rock," he said, his voice ringing with a conviction he had never known he possessed. "It is a promise, and you are not a part of it." With all his strength, he threw the stone against the glass. It did not break. It did not even crack. A faint, web-like pattern of energy flared across its surface for a second before fading. It was designed to withstand a missile strike. But the impact, the sound of it, was a declaration, an act of pure, irrational defiance. Kalen stared at him, his face a mask of contemptuous rage. A futile gesture. "You are trapped, Elias. You have always been trapped." The comm unit on Kalen's desk chimed. "Director Vance, your transport is ready. Shall we sedate the asset for transfer?" Kalen smiled, a thin, cruel curve of his lips. "That will not be necessary. He will be perfectly compliant." But as he turned back to Elias, his smile faltered. Elias was not looking at him. He was looking past him, toward the service entryway of the penthouse. And in that entryway, silent as a wraith, stood Lysander Kane. He was no longer in his tailored suit. He was dressed in dark, functional gear, and in his eyes was the righteous fury of a storm about to break. He had not been waiting for a signal. He had been the signal. The stone was just for Elias. The real rescue was already in motion. The transition from absolute stillness to chaotic motion was instantaneous. Lysander moved not like a man, but like a force of nature, a shadow detaching itself from the wall. Before Kalen's security team could even process his presence, he had crossed the room, a neural disruptor in his hand emitting a low, angry hum. Kalen reacted with the cold speed of a predator, spinning away from his desk and hitting a silent alarm on his wrist unit. "Contain him," he snarled, his voice losing its modulated calm for the first time, cracking with raw fury. The 2 guards stationed inside the penthouse drew their pulse rifles, but they were too slow. Lysander's movements were brutally efficient. A precise strike to the neck of the first guard sent him crumpling to the floor, his nervous system temporarily paralyzed. The second guard managed to raise his weapon, but Lysander was already on him, disarming him with a fluid twist and using the man's own body as a shield against any outside response. It was over in less than 5 seconds. The only sounds were the soft thud of bodies hitting the floor and the faint, menacing hum of the disruptor. Elias stood frozen by the window, his mind struggling to catch up. He had expected a fight, but this was a dismantling, a systematic deconstruction of Kalen's authority. Lysander straightened up, his chest rising and falling in controlled breaths. He ignored Kalen completely, his eyes locked on Elias. There was a question in them, a silent, urgent plea. "Are you with me?" Elias gave a single, sharp nod. The last thread of his old life, his old conditioning, snapped. He was no longer an asset waiting to be claimed. He was a participant in his own liberation. Kalen watched this silent exchange, his face a mask of disbelief turning to pure, unadulterated hatred. "You will not take him," he hissed, his hand reaching inside his jacket. "He is mine." Ethel guards. Lysander finally turned his attention to him, his expression one of utter contempt. "He was never yours. You just owned the cage." From his jacket, Kalen produced not a weapon, but a small silver device, a remote bonding dampener. He activated it, and a wave of psychic and pheromonal pressure slammed into Elias. It was Kalen's scent, magnified 1,000 times, a crushing weight of sterile mint and cold command. The bond, their bond, flared to life, not with affection, but as a chain, a leash. Every cell in Elias's body screamed at him to submit, to kneel, to obey his alpha. The conditioning was a physical agony, a fire in his veins. He staggered, his hand flying to the bite mark on his neck, which burned with a phantom pain. "Come here, Elias," Kalen commanded, his voice laced with the amplified power of the bond. "Return to your rightful place." Elias's legs trembled, his muscles trying to obey against his will. He could feel his resolve crumbling under the sheer biochemical force of the command. But then another scent cut through the sterile fog. Amber, scorched earth. Lysander was moving again, placing himself directly between Elias and Kalen. He did not have a dampener. He had something more powerful. Himself. "El," Lysander said, his voice low and steady, a grounding force in the psychic storm. "Look at me. He's using a machine, a trick. It's not real. What we have is real. Remember the sun." He reached out, not to touch Elias, but simply holding his hand open, palm up. An invitation, not a command. Elias's gaze was torn between the two alphas. Kalen represented a decade of ingrained obedience, a power that was written into his very cells. Lysander represented a half-forgotten memory, a fragile hope. The pain of the forced bond was excruciating. He wanted to give in, to make it stop. But he looked at Lysander's outstretched hand, and he saw the boy named Sander, offering him a secret stone. He saw the promise of a blue sky. With a guttural cry, torn from the deepest part of his soul, Elias fought back. He focused all his will, all his newfound defiance, on the bond, and he pushed. He visualized the chain connecting him to Kalen, and he imagined it shattering, link by link. It was the most difficult thing he had ever done. It felt like tearing his own skin, like breaking his own bones. Kalen's eyes widened in shock as he felt the resistance. He increased the power on the dampener, a desperate, final attempt to reassert control. "Obey me," he roared. A wave of agony, white-hot and blinding, washed over Elias. He fell to his knees, gasping. But he did not break. He held onto the Oji, image of the sun, of Lysander's face, and he pushed one last time. Something inside him snapped, a profound, fundamental shift. The burning pain in his neck vanished, replaced by a strange, hollow emptiness. The crushing weight of Kalen's presence lifted. The bond was broken, not suppressed, broken, severed by the sheer force of his will. He looked up, his vision clearing. Kalen was staring at his dampener, then at Elias, his expression one of utter horror and disbelief. He had not just lost an asset, he had been rejected, repudiated on the most primal level an alpha could experience. In that moment, he was no longer a powerful director. He was just a man who had lost everything. Lysander seized the opportunity. He moved past the stunned Kalen and knelt in front of Elias, his hands hovering, afraid to touch. "El, are you all right?" Elias looked at him, his face pale, but his eyes clear and bright with a fierce, triumphant light. He reached out and took Lysander's offered hand. His touch was firm, steady. "My name," he said, his voice raw but strong, "is Elias." Lysander's breath hitched. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, transforming his hard features, making him look like the boy from the memories again. "I know," he said softly. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, a shrill cry from the city below. Ethelgard's security forces were closing in. "We have to go," Lysander said, pulling Elias to his feet. He glanced back at Kalen, who was still standing, a statue of broken pride. Lysander gave him a final, dismissive look. "He's irrelevant now." He led Elias not toward the main entrance, but toward the service corridor he had used to enter. An extraction team, Anya at its head, met them there, armed and ready. "Clear?" Anya asked, her gaze flicking to Elias with professional curiosity. "Clear," Lysander confirmed. "Let's go." As they moved into the corridor, Elias took one last look back at the penthouse. He saw the sterile furniture, the cold art, the panoramic view of a city that had been his prison. He saw Kalen, a small, defeated figure in his perfect, empty world. He felt no pity. He felt no anger. He felt nothing at all. He turned away and didn't look back, his hand held firmly in Lysander's. He was walking away from a life that was never his, and toward a future he could not yet see. But he could smell it. It smelled like scorched earth after a cleansing fire. It smelled like freedom. The escape was not a cinematic explosion, but a quiet, methodical disappearance. Lysander's team moved with the silent efficiency of ghosts, guiding them through a labyrinth of service tunnels and forgotten maintenance shafts deep within the city's infrastructure. The air grew thick with the smell of damp concrete, ozone, and the metallic tang of aging machinery. It was a world away from the filtered, scented air of the penthouse. It was real. Elias found himself breathing it in deeply. The unfamiliar smells a confirmation of his new reality. He was no longer in the cage. The journey was a blur of darkness, low-light vision, and hushed, coded commands from Anya's team. Lysander never let go of his hand, his grip a constant, reassuring pressure. He was a shield, a guide, a solid presence in the disorienting chaos of flight. Elias, for his part, felt strangely calm. The violent severing of his bond with Kalen had left a void, but it was not a painful one. It was a clean slate, a space that was now entirely his own. The years of conditioning had not vanished, but they no longer held power over him. They were like a dead language He could still understand, but felt no compulsion to speak. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a cavernous, abandoned subway station. A heavy-duty cargo transport, stripped of any identifying marks, waited for them on the rusted tracks. Phase 1 complete, Anya reported to Lysander, her face illuminated by the green glow of a data slate. We are off Ethelgard's grid. They'll be tearing the city apart looking for you, but they'll be looking in the wrong stratum. Lysander nodded, his attention still focused on Elias. Are you injured? He asked, his voice low, scanning Elias for any sign of distress. I am empty, Elias replied honestly, but not broken. Lysander's thumb brushed against his knuckles, a gesture of profound relief. Good. That's good. They boarded the transport, the heavy doors sealing behind them with a definitive metallic clang. It was the sound of a door closing on his old life. The interior was Spartan, functional, filled with tactical gear and communication consoles. It was a war room on wheels. Anya and her team immediately went to work, their fingers flying across holographic displays, establishing encrypted networks and monitoring Ethelgard's response. Lysander led Elias to a small private compartment at the rear of the transport. It contained little more than a simple cot and a storage locker. It's not much, Lysander said, his voice laced with an apology. But it's safe. For now. Elias looked around the small, metal-walled space. It was a cell of a sort, but the door had a handle on the inside. The difference was everything. He sat on the edge of the cot, the rough texture of the blanket a novel sensation against his skin. He had spent a decade surrounded by silk and cashmere, materials designed to soothe and sedate. This was coarse, real. He ran his hand over it, marveling at the simple, honest texture. Lysander watched him, a strange, tender expression on his face. There's so much I need to tell you, he began. So much I need to explain. About the program, about what they did to us. You don't have to, Elias interrupted softly. You gave me back the memory. The rest, they are just details. The truth is, you remembered, when everyone else, including myself, had forgotten. The weight of those years of searching, of fighting, was evident in the lines around Lysander's eyes. He looked tired, but his gaze was alight with a fierce, protective fire. I never stopped looking for you, El, he said, using the childhood name with a natural intimacy. Not for one day. When I saw what they had turned you into, that placid doll at Kaelin's side, I swore I would get you back, or I would die trying. The raw sincerity of his words was overwhelming. Elias had never been the object of such a powerful, unconditional devotion. Kaelin's obsession was about ownership. This was about connection. Why? Elias asked, the question a genuine, curious whisper. We were children. It was a long time ago. Some things you don't forget, Lysander said, his voice thick with emotion. The first time you see the sun. The first person who ever holds your hand like they never want to let go. You were the only real thing in that white-walled hell. How could I forget that? He took a step closer, kneeling in front of Elias so they were at eye level. The small space was filled with his scent, the warm, earthy aroma of amber and safety. It no longer felt like a violation. It felt like coming home. Kaelin's mark is gone, Lysander said, his gaze fixed on the pale, unmarked skin of Elias's neck. The bond is broken. You are free. The word hung in the air between them. Free. Elias was not sure he even knew what it meant. His entire life had been a series of directives, of functions to be performed. Freedom was a terrifyingly blank canvas. Lysander seemed to understand his unspoken fear. "You don't have to be anything you don't want to be," he said gently. "You don't have to be a prime Omega. You don't have to be anyone's partner. You can just be. We'll figure out the rest together." He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before cupping Elias's cheek. His touch was warm, solid, and infinitely gentle. It was not the proprietary touch of an owner, but the reverent touch of someone handling something precious. Elias leaned into the touch, a decade of loneliness and suppressed longing rising to the surface. He had been touched by Kaelin thousands of times, but he had not been truly held since he was a boy. He closed his eyes, and a single tear, this one of gratitude, traced a path down his cheek. Lysander's thumb gently wiped it away. They stayed like that for a long time, the transport rumbling through the dark tunnels beneath the city, carrying them further and further away from their past. It was a quiet, fragile moment, a truce in the middle of a war. The emptiness inside Elias began to fill, not with commands or conditioning, but with a tentative, burgeoning warmth. It was the first glimmer of a new dawn, a promise of a sun he had yet to see, but now, finally, believed in. He was not an asset. He was not an experiment. He was Elias, and he was free. The next few days were a disorienting collage of motion and stillness. The cargo transport carried them deep into the outlands, the vast, unregulated territories that sprawled beyond the corporate city-states. The sterile vertical world of polished chrome and recycled air gave way to a horizontal landscape of rust-colored mesas, cracked earth, and a sky so vast and blue it almost hurt to look at. They traded the transport for a smaller, all-terrain vehicle, their party shrinking until it was just Lysander, Elias, and Anya. They were heading for a place Lysander called Haven, a hidden outpost for his operations. During the long drives, Lysander would talk. He filled in the gaps in Elias's memory, not with clinical data from a file, but with shared stories. He spoke of their time in the facility, of their childish rebellion, of the other children they had known. He painted a picture of a past that was not just a traumatic experiment, but a life, however constrained, that had been lived. He spoke of El, the quiet, empathetic boy who could calm the other children with a touch. And he spoke of Sander, the angry, protective boy who had tried to tear the world apart for him. Elias listened, and with each story, another piece of himself clicked into place. He was not just the sum of his trauma or his conditioning. He was a person with a history, a person who had been loved and fought for. He began to speak too. At first, his words were hesitant, stiff with the formality of his old life. He described the cold perfection of the penthouse, the suffocating weight of Kaelin's ownership, the endless, silent days. He spoke of the correction chamber, and as he did, Lysander's hand would find his, a silent, grounding presence. Anya, for her part, remained a quiet, observant shadow. She was all business, her focus on their security and the digital war she was waging against the Ethelgard Consortium. Kaelin had declared them corporate terrorists, placing a massive bounty on their heads. Ethelgard's network was hunting them relentlessly. But Anya was always one step ahead, a ghost in their machine, feeding them false leads and covering their tracks with layers of brilliant misdirection. One evening, they stopped to make camp in the shelter of a towering rock formation. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange, purple, and gold. Elias stepped out of the vehicle and stared, mesmerized. It was the first true sunset he had ever seen. The filtered, time-regulated light of the city was a pale imitation of this raw, breathtaking beauty. He could feel the warmth of the fading light on his skin, could smell the dust and the dry, hardy plants that clung to life in the arid landscape. It was real. Lysander came to stand beside him, their shoulders brushing. He didn't speak, simply shared the moment, respecting the silent reverence of Elias's experience. "We used to dream of this," Elias said softly, his voice filled with awe. "But I never imagined. It's more than I remembered." "Some things memory can't do justice to," Lysander replied, his gaze on Elias's face, not the sunset. He was watching the wonder dawn in Elias's eyes, and his expression was one of profound satisfaction, of a promise finally fulfilled. Later, as darkness fell and a blanket of stars, brighter and more numerous than he had ever thought possible, covered the sky, they sat by a small, crackling fire. Anya was inside the vehicle, running her counter-surveillance sweeps. "What happens now?" Elias asked, looking into the dancing flames. "We fight," Lysander said simply. "Kaelin and Ethelgard won't stop. They can't afford to. You are not just a runaway Omega to them. You are a symbol. You are proof that their system can be broken, that their perfect creations can choose. They will hunt us to the ends of the earth to erase that truth." "You started a war," Elias observed, not with accusation, but with a dawning understanding of the scale of Lysander's actions. "For me." "I started a war for all of us," Lysander corrected him gently. "For every child they ever put in a white room. For everyone they tried to break and rebuild into something useful. This was always bigger than just you and me, El. You were just the catalyst. You were the one I couldn't bear to lose." The intensity of his conviction was a powerful force. Elias was beginning to understand that Lysander was not just a corporate rival. He was a revolutionary, using the tools of the system to dismantle it from within. He was a vandal, but he was vandalizing a prison. A silence settled between them, comfortable and deep. The empty space left by Kaelin's bond no longer felt like a void. It felt like potential, like a field of fertile earth waiting for something new to grow. Elias looked at Lysander, at the way the firelight played across the hard lines of his face, softening them. He saw the alpha who had marked him, who had hunted him, who had torn his world apart. But he also saw Sander, the boy who had held his hand and promised him the sun. His scent, once a source of terror and confusion, was now a source of comfort, a constant reminder of his safety, his freedom. He felt a pull toward him, a deep, resonant hum of rightness that had nothing to do with biology or conditioning. It was a choice, his choice. "Your scent," Elias said, his voice quiet. "When you marked me, it was an act of war, a claim against Kaelin." "Yes," Lysander admitted, his gaze steady. "And what is it now?" The question hung in the cool night air. Lysander understood what he was asking. It was not about possession. It was about partnership, about a new kind of bond, one forged in defiance and built on a shared history. "Now," Lysander said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. "It's an invitation. If you want it." Elias held his gaze, a silent conversation passing between them. He thought of the cold, sterile penthouse, of the possessive, painful bond with Kaelin. He thought of this vast, open sky, the honest warmth of the fire, the steadfast loyalty of the man sitting across from him. He knew his answer. He had known it since he threw the stone against the glass. He leaned forward, closing the small space between them. He tilted his head, exposing the pale, unmarked skin of his neck. It was a gesture of ultimate trust, an offering, a choice. "Then invite me," Elias whispered. Lysander's breath caught in his throat. He had dreamed of this moment, fought for it, bled for it, but he had never truly allowed himself to believe it would happen. He had been prepared to be Elias's guardian, his friend, his protector for the rest of their lives, asking for nothing in return. To be offered this, a bond freely given, was a gift so profound it almost unmanned him. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and gently brushed Elias's hair back from his neck. The skin was smooth, perfect, a blank canvas where Kaelin's mark of ownership had once been. To place his own mark there was the ultimate act of possession, but coming from Elias as a request, it was transformed into an act of mutual belonging. "Are you sure?" Lysander asked, his voice thick with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "This isn't the program, El. This isn't about an alpha claiming an omega. This is forever, a bond between us. It can't be broken like Kaelin's was." "I know," Elias replied, his voice soft but unwavering. His eyes were clear, open, holding Lysander's gaze with a trust that was absolute. "I am not the person they made me, and you are not the weapon they tried to turn you into. We are the ones who remembered. I want to choose this. I want to choose you." That was all Lysander needed to hear. He leaned in, his movements slow, reverent. He inhaled the scent of Elias's skin, a clean, subtle fragrance, like rain on stone, a scent he had carried in his memory for over a decade. It was the scent of home. He pressed a gentle kiss to the sensitive skin below Elias's ear, a silent promise, before lowering his head to the hollow of his neck. The bite was not the sharp, possessive act he had seen other alphas perform. It was a careful, deliberate claiming, a fusion of souls. As his teeth gently broke the skin, a jolt of pure energy, warm and golden, surged between them. It was not the cold, electric shock of Kaelin's artificial bond. This was organic, alive, a current of shared memory, shared pain, and a fierce, shared hope for the future. He felt Elias's history, the years of loneliness, the sterile perfection, the terror, the defiance, and he offered his own in return. The anger, the relentless drive, the obsessive search, the unwavering loyalty. Their pasts, their presents, their futures, all intertwined in that single, profound moment. When he pulled back, a perfect crimson mark bloomed on Elias's neck. He licked the wound clean, the coppery taste of blood a sacrament on his tongue. He sealed the bond, and in that moment the universe seemed to settle into its proper alignment. A deep, resonant peace filled him, a feeling he had not known since he was a boy running through a field of yellow grass with his best friend. Elias let out a shuddering breath, his hands coming up to grip Lysander's arms. The emptiness inside him was gone, filled to the brim with the warm, protective certainty of Lysander's presence. It was not a chain, it was an anchor. He felt whole, complete, in a way he had never imagined possible. He was no longer just Elias. He was Elias, bonded to Lysander, his Sander. They stayed like that for a long time, kneeling by the fire under the vast, star-dusted sky, wrapped in the silent, powerful embrace of their new bond. The sense of amber, scorched earth, and rain on stone mingled in the cool night air, creating something new, something that was uniquely theirs. The crackle of the fire was the only sound. a counterpoint to the steady, synchronized beat of their hearts. Eventually, Elias rested his forehead against Lysander's, his eyes fluttering closed. He felt safe. For the first time in his life, he felt unequivocally, absolutely safe. "The sun," he murmured, the words a sleepy whisper. "You kept your promise." Lysander's arms tightened around him, a gesture of fierce, gentle possession. "Always El," he vowed, his voice a low rumble against Elias's skin. "Always." The war was not over. Ethelgard would not rest. Kaelin would not forgive. Their future was a dangerous, uncertain path stretching out into the darkness. But as they held each other in the quiet solitude of the outlands, they were not afraid. They had found each other across a chasm of time and trauma. They had reforged themselves in the fires of rebellion. Whatever came next, they would face it together, bonded, free. As Elias drifted toward a peaceful, dreamless sleep, for the first time in a decade, his last conscious thought was of the color blue. The impossible, brilliant blue of a sky he now knew was real, waiting for him at the dawn.